few months ago, we started a sermon series called Don't Get Into Things, and we talked first about gossip and how it's not wise for us to talk about people behind their back and to gossip about them and spread rumors and lies. And we then talked about not getting into things that we didn't have authority over, as Saul tried to offer a sacrifice in 1 Samuel 13 that he wasn't authorized to offer, and also how he tried in chapter 15 of 1 Samuel to override the authority of the Lord and not utterly slay the Amalekites. And today we're going to finish this series by talking about not getting into things that hurt you. That hurt you. What does it mean to be hurt? You might say, in what way? Sometimes we've hurt people unintentionally. Sometimes we've hurt people intentionally. The word hurt has two meanings. It's either causing physical pain or injury to somebody or something, or to cause mental pain or distress. I don't know about you, but I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt me. I'm just not wanting to do those things. And I don't try and don't intend to hurt anyone around me. But sometimes that might happen. And in this lesson, I want to discuss with you three things that have hurt families. They've hurt friendships. They've hurt churches. They've hurt reputations. They've hurt influences. And they've hurt souls. And I don't enjoy discussing them. But nonetheless, they need to be discussed. Preaching the whole counsel of God is not always easy, but is expected of gospel preachers. And today, the first thing that I want to talk about, not getting into things that hurt us, is drugs. If you define the word drug, there are two definitions for it. It is a medicine or other substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body, or it's a substance taken for its narcotic or stimulant effects, often illegally. In fact, it was estimated a minimum of 190,900 people a year die due to drugs. Premature deaths because of drugs. 190,000. By the way, that's minimum. The range goes from 115,900 to 230,100. And these are the estimated amounts of death that occur from drug misuse or overdose each year. Now, I categorized three different types of drugs that we're going to talk about in this point. And the first one, you may not have thought about this, but alcohol. Look, alcohol is a drug. It is a drug. It is something that stimulates the mind. It destroys brains. It is a drug that alters your mind and mine if we partake of it. And it is something that is very harmful to the body. It is a drug because it affects the body like any other drug. Now, what does the Bible say about alcohol? Well, in 1 Peter 4:3, you have Peter writing, and he says, "We've spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lewdness and lusts and drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries." You know, it's the same writer that would say you are a royal priesthood, a chosen, special people, so don't act like the world. And he says in chapter 4:3, we've been like them enough. We've had enough of that. It's time to put that away. But even in Romans 13:13, Paul would write, "Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy." But then another interesting passage of Scripture that Paul would record is 1 Corinthians 10:23 through 24, where he writes that all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. And he says then, all things are lawful, but not all things edify. And then he says, let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. When I read stories of alcohol being a killer of families and a killer of other people, how in the world can I say that it's justifiable and it's got the other's well-being in its best interest? If you go to a sports game, they're going to close down, typically. If you go to a hockey game, which is 3 periods long, you won't be able to get alcohol in the 3rd period. If you go to a football game, a lot of places, 4th quarter, they cut everything off. But you know what still happens? See, there's a workaround to everything. I have gone to enough games where I have seen enough people, and they come back with 3 or 4 at the end of the 3rd quarter. Do you know what the logic behind closing things down is in a sporting event? The intended purpose of that is perhaps we'll give them enough time to sober up so that they can then drive home and go on about their way and everything will be fine. How many fights have occurred at a football arena or at a hockey arena and alcohol was part of the problem? How many families have gotten a phone call that their loved one died in a car accident and alcohol was the reason, whether they were the one drinking or they were hit by one who was? This is a deadly drug. It has no other well-being in its mind. But boy, the commercials do a great way of fooling us, don't they? You'll never see a commercial really show the true effects of alcohol. No, you'll see a man, he's got a beer in his hand, and he's got women on his arms, and he's cool, he's the life of the party. They don't show him at 3 in the morning in the restroom while he's throwing up. They don't show him after a life of drinking and how his body starts to fail because of it. They don't show the heated argument between he and his wife when he's in a drunken stupor and he hits her. No, they don't want to show all of that because that won't sell. Alcohol's cool, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's deadly. In fact, if you look at an article that Caleb Colley wrote, he wrote this article called Alcohol, a Deadly Poison. He presents the following reasons that alcohol is a problem. When you study it, the first one is alcohol gets people into trouble. When you read Proverbs 20 and verse 1, it reveals that wine is a mocker and strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. And then he talks about the statement should not come as a surprise then, considering that according to some estimates, alcohol is involved in 70% of all murders, 41% of all assaults, 50% of sexual assaults, 60% of crimes against children in that regard, and 50% of fights and assaults in homes, 37% of suicide, and 55% of arrests. And this is a good idea. That's what we want to hitch our wagon to. Alcohol gets people into trouble. It's not liquid courage. Although that's what some people, let me get some liquid courage and then I'll go say what you'd never say sober. That's wise. Alcohol gets people into trouble. Secondly, though, it causes accidents. Alcohol is involved in 66% of fatal accidents, 53% of fire deaths, 36% of pedestrian accidents, 22% of home accidents, 45% of drowning, 50% of skiing accidents, 50% of all automobile accidents, and it is the #1 killer of people 25 years old and younger. #1 killer. But you won't see, typically speaking, on the news, a passionate plea to get rid of that item in your kitchen. But boy, they'll come on with some spiel about which item in your kitchen might kill you. Tune in at 6 and we'll tell you. Perhaps you tune in and they said, did you know your blender may kill you? Or which household item causes the most deaths? Did you know that the dryer causes the most deaths? Oh, they'll do stories about dryers and blenders and other things, but they don't really want to make a passionate plea about alcohol, it seems. Where's the logic or lack thereof? Where's it gone? Alcohol causes accidents often, but then it also can lead to serious health problems. Because the alcoholic beverages are poisonous, they can damage the body. In fact, this is one reason why God told the children of Israel not to look upon intoxicating beverages or to quote-unquote hang out with people who are getting drunk. Proverbs 23, 20 and 21 and 29 through 35. Alcohol can kill brain cells, which cannot be replaced, and causes memory loss, starting with the thing last learned or memorized. Also, alcohol is responsible for more admissions to mental hospitals than any other cause. You know, you used to hear the phrase, "Why don't you just drink poison?" We are. And we don't realize it. It seems. Finally, alcohol causes spiritual problems. It'd be one thing if it gets people into trouble and it causes that. Look, a temper can get someone into trouble. It can cause accidents and it can get some serious health problems because you might get into a fight. But anger is not a sin in and of itself. But alcohol causes spiritual problems because God wants His servants to be able to think clearly and act responsibly as possible, and alcohol prevents that. Old Testament priests were forbidden to drink beverage alcohol, Leviticus 10, 8 through 11, Daniel 1, 5 through 8. And the New Testament teaches that Christians also should be sober-minded people, 1 Thessalonians 5, 6 and 8, and 1 Peter 1, 13, and chapter 4 and verse 7. Sober-minded. But you know, this isn't just the problem that we have in the world and in our country where we don't really see that it's a problem. The next one's not really viewed as one either, and it's tobacco. Now, you don't have a verse in the Bible that says, "Thou shalt not smoke or partake of tobacco." And I'm not going to try to present to you, well, your body's a temple, and therefore you've got to treat it as such. I believe that may be discussing the church in 1 Corinthians 6. But even granting that, the Bible still condemns this. Let me give you some statistics. How much money do you think is spent a year on cigarettes alone? About an average of $70 a week, $280 a month. You know, that's incredible. $70 a week is spent on cigarettes, average. And you know, the interesting thing is, my wife just went to the grocery store recently, and we got almost a month's worth of groceries for like $100. Majority of that would be spent on cigarettes, an average household, in 1 week. One individual said that he would be stopping to smoke, and so he quit smoking, and he said, "Look, I'm going to have $320 back into my bank account each month." And he bought a new car with that money. It's estimated, too, that a total of $80 billion is spent per year on cigarettes. $80 billion. But we can't feed the homeless. We can't take care of those people who we see at the end of the cash register line where they say, "Would you like to donate to such?" We can't donate to cancer research. We can't do things like that. No, our money's tied up. Should it be? Is it wise to intentionally make your life revolve around something like this that doesn't give any benefit? You know, I could argue then that you're not being a good steward if you're wasting this money on something that's ultimately killing you. I could argue that, but I think there's a better argument even to be made. It's not just that the money being spent is the issue. You've got to remember 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 24. I'm looking out for something of others' well-being. Is it really looking out for your well-being or for anyone else's to partake of something that is deadly, that is going to kill us? Did you know that a study was done and they asked, what does smoking cause? What type of health problems do they cause? And there was a study about 10 health effects that are caused by smoking that you just didn't know. Here's some of them. Number one leading cause of blindness in those 65 years and older, cigarettes, smoking. So blindness is one. Type 2 diabetes has been known to be one. Also, you have hip fractures a little bit more commonly because of this. Gum disease, that's just to name a few. All of those things come from smoking a cigarette. This is harmful to us. And I know the age-old story has been told, if I gave you a glass of water and told you I put a little bit of bleach in it, would you drink it? And of course, you'd say, no, I wouldn't drink it. But why then is our country obsessed and consumed with doing something a whole lot more frequently and causes way more damage to your body? If you drank one drop, you'd recover from that probably, of bleach and a little bit of water probably. Can you recover from a lifetime of smoking? I don't see Brother Charles here today, but his brother Robert went to South Haven when I was growing up and took me under his wing and helped him make the tapes back when they still were doing cassette tapes and not CDs. And he had trouble breathing. And I asked him one day why. And he, very honest and open, he said, for several years I smoked. And I've destroyed my body by doing it. I remember when he passed away, we went to their house to see his wife, Evelyn. And I just saw what seemed to be hundreds of oxygen tanks. And they were his. See, he couldn't breathe anymore on his own at the end of his life. Why? He would have told you, I made a foolish mistake when I was younger, and I'm paying for it now. I will never forget walking through his living room in his house and seeing all of those tanks. And I will never forget him telling his wife that he's so bad. He loved leading singing. He loved it. And he got to a point later in life where he couldn't do it anymore because of that, because of all the damage it did to his lungs. And I remember his wife telling us that he was crying one day because he wanted to sing, but he knew he couldn't anymore. This is not a harmless drug. This is not a harmless little stick. And look, I know the latest craze is vaping. There have been studies done that show that's even worse to the body than regular smoking because it's an accelerated process of it. This is not wise. This is not something that is good for us to be involved in. And if God stated that He made man in His image, how then can I take that image and destroy it? This is not wise. But it's not just alcohol and it's not just tobacco. Look, there's also what we would call harder drugs out there. And in all sincerity, I could take the same biblical arguments and present them to you again, and they would apply. But some want to ask, why can we take prescription drugs then? Why is that okay? But look, it needs to be remembered that prescription drugs are given by a doctor when we're sick who has studied medicine to know how much is enough and the right amount. And it needs to be understood that if a doctor is going to do their job properly, underline that, because I know some don't. But if a doctor will do their job properly, they won't just try to load you up with something that's not going to help. It's up to us, after being prescribed with something, to responsibly do as the directions say, and to get rid of it when we're done with it. And I don't mean throw it away, you flush it down the toilet. Just get rid of it. No temptation involved in that. But it needs to be understood that doctors have been trained. But even the Bible spoke of medicine and physicians, because you have in Matthew 9 and verse 12, the Bible teaching that Jesus would say, those who are well, they don't need a physician. Well, what is a physician going to do? Is he just going to look at them and say, you are sick? Thought I'd let you know. Well, thanks for that on-the-spot report. I had no clue that I was sick. No, that's not the physician's job. The physician would look at them and say, you're sick, this is what we're going to try to do to get you better again. And Jesus says, if you're well, you don't go to the physician. But then another argument is made back in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 22, where it says, a merry heart does good like medicine. Even in the Old Testament, there was medicine that was understood that it had a good purpose behind it. But remember what I said in the Bible class. Man has often taken what God has called good and perverted it for evil. Drugs, for any reason other than getting over a sickness, they don't truly help us, and they're going to do nothing but hurt us. Number 2, gambling. Gambling hurts. It destroys lives. And if one sincerely thinks, and they'd be right in saying, well, gambling's not found in the Bible anywhere, and you're not going to find a verse that says, thou shalt not go to the slots, or thou shalt not play the lottery, or thou shalt not do such and such. But you won't find that about cigarettes either. And yet, I'm going to tell you today, both are condemned in Scripture. There are reasons that gambling is wrong, but I want to get some of the bad arguments out of the way first. It's not a right or a good argument or wise to say gambling is wrong because the Bible teaches that we're to work for our money, indicating that it is wrong to get money in any other way other than working for it, okay? But brethren, that would mean giving gifts is a sin. And that's not true. We are to work for a living, but giving and receiving gifts would be sinful, and it would also be sinful then for Christians to assist the poor and for the poor to accept help from the church because they didn't work for that money. That's not a very good argument. There's another one, too, that says gambling is wrong because of the risk factor. That's not true really either. That's not why gambling's wrong, because look, all of life is a risk. I'm taking a risk by breathing, by being up, by doing anything. I'm going to leave today and I'm going to get in my truck and I'm going to drive on the interstate to go home, and I'm taking a risk. That's not wrong. That's not why gambling's a sin or why it's wrong to be a part of it. And in fact, being a Christian is a risk, especially for those in the first century. And even in the parable of the talents, which Ryan was talking about in his sermon, you have the master saying, why didn't you at least take it to the bank and get interest on it? Take a risk with the bank. The risk factor is not the problem. And brethren, when we make a weak argument, the truth suffers. The truth suffers. I want to define gambling, and then I want to give you biblical reasons why it would not be wise and why it would be wrong. Number 1, this is the Apple Dictionary definition. It's playing games of chance for money. In fact, it says to bet. Take a risky action in the hope of a desired result. Don Blackwell wrote a book called Truth About Moral Issues. And in it, he talks about gambling, and this is the definition that he gave. It is an uncertain or arbitrary event. These are the 3 elements that have to take place for gambling to happen. There's an uncertain or arbitrary event. There is a wager, something of value, such as money, that is deliberately chanced on a particular outcome. And there is a clear winner and a clear loser. And when all of those things come together, you have gambling. Now, why does the Bible condemn it? Really, how does the Bible condemn it? Number 1, you have the covetous mindset. What are the reasons, the 2 most chief reasons why someone would want to gamble? Greed and covetousness. Now, you may be thinking, no, I do it because I want more money to help such and such. That's greed at its purest definition. I want more, I need more. Covetousness, I want what they have on the table. I want what other people have in front of me. I want that. Even if we don't realize it, that's really what it boils down to. In the Bible, there's a principle laid out in Exodus 20 that says you shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. What about his money? Can I submit to you that God covered that in the verse? And I don't just mean by anything that is your neighbor's. In Bible times, how was wealth measured? In a large part by the livestock that an individual had, by the things that they possessed. They didn't have credit cards and debit cards and a bank account with all of the things in the regard that you and I may have today. And so you would look out into the pasture, and if you had a lot of livestock, which, by the way, we are told Job had a lot of livestock and was considered wealthy because of it. What livestock was part of what their wealth was considered. And so God says, don't look at their wealth, their donkey or their oxen, and covet it. So would it be right for me to go to your house, and if you had some money lying on the table, would it be right for me to look at that and covet it and want that for mine? No, it's yours. It's not mine. It's yours. How then can I sit at a table and gamble when their money's on the table? How can I do that without coveting? Wanting what's not mine. And even if they're willing to give it up, it's still not mine. And I'm coveting it. And the same principle of this mindset of Exodus 20, it carries over into the New Testament when Jesus says in Luke 12, 13 through 14, he has an individual say, tell my brother, teacher, to divide the inheritance with me. And he said to him, man, who are you that made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Who did that? And then he says something that's so interesting. Take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. It doesn't matter what's in your bank account. That doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't make your life better. But boy, many people have thought that. And my life is not based on the physical possessions that I have, because in Matthew 6, 19 through 21, we're told not to lay up treasures on earth, where what happens? Where a thief breaks in and steals, or moth and rust destroy, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. What good does it do if you gamble and get $1 billion if you're going to leave it behind anyway? And you have no treasure laid up in heaven. If I spend all my life getting money and all the money in the world that I can possibly get, what good does it truly do if I've spent no time laying up a spiritual treasure? But then there's the addiction mindset of it. It is addicting. Some years ago, an online article that referenced the Dallas Times-Herald told of a pawn shop owner who had patrons who sold them their artificial limbs so that they could go gamble. One individual gave a glass eye. And in another case, gold teeth were pulled out with pliers and hocked for money so that they could go and gamble. You want to talk about desperation? In 1 Corinthians 6:12, you have Paul saying something similar. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. This would apply with the drugs point that we talked about just a minute ago too. The moment that I am brought under the power of gambling, the moment that I'm taking pliers and pulling my teeth out so that I can hock it for money, I've been brought under the power of gambling, and it is controlling me. It has consumed me. Can I submit to you that we should not take part in anything that gets such a hold on us that we cannot stop? And that it's wise to just never be involved in something that could potentially get a hold on us so that we could never stop. There's another principle here that I want to discuss, and it's the influence principle. You remember that our actions could cause someone to stumble. In 1 Corinthians 8, 10 through 13, that's exactly what Paul's talking about. Look, meat might make my brother to offend. Well, then you know what I'm never going to do? Verse 13, he says, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Now, that doesn't mean Paul's going to starve himself to death. What he's actually saying there is, I will never put my brother in a situation where he will stumble because of my actions. The influence principle is one that is not grasped very well. But I don't want to be the reason that someone criticizes the church. Well, did you hear about that preacher? Got caught up in gambling and lost all this money and then did such and such. And yeah, where did he preach at? Oh, the Somerville Church of Christ. I don't want to be the one that brings a negative light on the Lord's church. Because I'm told in James 1:27 to keep myself pure and unspotted from the world. And gambling is a worldly thing. And there's an old proverb that says, in a bet there is a fool, and a thief. And I don't want to be either one. I don't want to be either one. But I want to give you some arguments that have been made in the defense of this. Now, this is pulled from The Truth About Moral Issues. I have a copy in my office. If anybody would like to borrow it, feel free. This is from Don Blackwell. These are some arguments that have been made to him over the years, and he compiled them up and put them in the book. Number one, how is it different than the stock market? Okay, but you're not winning or losing at the expense of anyone else. And in fact, the stocks themselves are all about the economic gain, and a profit is made by the exchange of goods and services. No one loses there. Something is done, a service is performed, and legitimate exchanges take place. Your money goes to work for you. You won't ever see it just disappear from your eyes. And finally, profiting from someone else using your money is not a sin, but an honest economic principle. Otherwise, the master that Jesus talks about in Matthew 25 was a sinner for giving some his money and allowing them to try to capitalize on it. It's not wrong. Stock market itself isn't the issue. Then there's another argument that's been made. Well, good comes from it. But in truth, this is just a lie that many politicians and others have told to try to justify gambling. Or a lie that others have believed sincerely. I understand you can sincerely believe that, but let me give you some statistics on this. Michael Fitzgerald, a columnist for The Record in Stockton, California, he found the following, that in a 1994 study out of the University of Illinois, it indicated the social problems created by gambling, that is addiction, domestic abuse, suicide, crime, indebtedness, outweigh by far any benefits to the community. In fact, the gambling enterprise cost taxpayers $3 for every $1 of state revenue collected. Doesn't sound very good. But then another study was conducted in a Creighton University study that found that countries with casinos soon have double the bankruptcy rates of countries without casinos. That doesn't sound very good. But finally, according to information on the Nevada Resort Association website in January of 2009, they said that over a third of all the funding from gambling goes to Nevada's public schools, and it comes directly from the gambling industry. Yet when you consult the Nevada Department of Education, you find something different. It says that only 15% of educational funding comes from gambling, not 1/3. The benefit argument is seriously and sincerely just another carefully crafted lie of the devil. I know I've talked about Dave Ramsey before, but he puts it this way. The lottery is a tax on the poor. That's what it is. And typically speaking, you don't see rich people buying lottery tickets because they don't need them. It's a tax on the poor. Now, what about this one? I only spend $1 a week, or, and these are from the book themselves, I only do it a little. But again, the sin is not in the quantity of the activity, but the quality of the activity. Look, I can go and commit a murder just once a year, and I don't think anyone in this room would sit there and say, well, they only did it once. Or I could hit somebody, a husband could hit his wife, and I don't think anyone would say, well, I only hit her once. That's not that bad. Not that big of a deal. Look, just on Friday night, an NFL player got released because video surfaced of him hitting a woman. You know how many times he'd done that? Once. And the team that he played for said, you know what? That's it. Gone. They didn't sit there and say, well, you only did it one time. That's okay. We'll work through this. Can I cheat on my wife so long as I only do it a little bit? Can I use the Lord's name in vain so long as I only do it a little bit? Again, the sin is not in the quantity of how often you do it, but in the quality of what you're doing. And that has to be remembered. But in case you're not sold, I want to tell you one more story about this. Years ago, when my dad was trying to preach on gambling, he told this story that a businessman went to the casino and he lost all of the money that he brought with him. And he was getting ready to go home, and then a thought hit him. He's got this practically brand new SUV sitting in the lot, And he thinks, you know what? I'll sell it. I'll get some seed money. I'll go back in. I'll win all my money back, and I'll win enough money to buy another brand new SUV. And so that's what he did. He sold his SUV for next to nothing. And he went in and lost all of that money too. This is a real story. This really happened to someone. And so he goes out, and he finds a telephone pole, and he looks around, see if anybody's watching, and he cocks his head back and rams his head into that telephone pole. Begins to bleed, and he calls his wife. He says, honey, I've been robbed. Some people came over, and they grabbed me, and they took me to the ATM, and they made me take out an inordinate amount of money, and then they took the car, and they've beaten me up, and I'm stranded here at this casino. And she believed him. So she went and picked him up, but then later was told by the bank that they don't allow that much money to be given at an ATM. And she found out he had lied and that it was gambling. I heard of a story of a man who had his little boy sitting in his car seat. And he goes, I'm going to go up and gamble real quick, just a couple of quick games. And he said hours went by. And he went back down and he saw his son still in the car seat, asleep, with stained cheeks from when he'd been crying, trying to get his dad's attention. And his exact words were, that's when I felt the pain and realized what kind of father can do that to their kid. And finally, suicide rates are very high in consideration with gambling. Look, suicide attempts among pathological gamblers are higher than for any of the addictions, and second only to suicide attempt rates among individuals with major affective disorders, such as schizophrenia and a few major hereditary disorders. Second leading cause, gambling. Does that fall under the well-being of others? It is never wise to take what the Lord has given us and waste it. Finally, we all know what this is. Okay? Not much definition needs to be given on this. It's a problem in our world today. It's a major problem in the society that we live in. And in fact, more than 4 in 10 Americans are now saying that it's morally acceptable, 43%. In fact, lack of restrictions on this very thing have caused it to skyrocket. And the most popular places that this particular thing is viewed is in a hotel, Airbnb, 40%, in a cafe or a restaurant, 30%, at work, 29%. But why is it wrong? Because look, think about this. Majority of the world right now, it looks like, in a lot of places, think it's okay. So how then could it be wrong? Well, from a moral perspective, not even talking biblically first, let me give you 3 reasons why it's wrong. Number 1, this industry turns our people into products, objects. Number 2, it reduces us to a mindset that one has to be completely perfect in every way. It hurts self-esteem. And number 3, it denies the dignity, and many would say the beauty of the human soul. And by the way, those aren't my reasons. That's from an article called The Number One Reason This Is Bad. But biblically speaking, we're told that this is a sin as well. When you study the Bible, you find 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18 where it says, flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. 1 Peter 2:11, beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Colossians 3:5, put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And Ephesians 5:3, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be named among you. Don't let this be a part of your life as is fitting for the saint. It's not fitting for a saint, a Christian, to have this named among them. But it's not just these verses that you can find, because look, we're not always better off with a profound knowledge of everything. In Ecclesiastes 1, 17 through 18, you have Solomon there, and he's talking, and he says, I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this is also vanity. grasping for the wind. What did he say in verse 18? In much wisdom is much grief. I don't need a profound understanding of things like this to better my life on earth. In fact, I'd be better off having the knowledge of a child when it comes to all three of these, not knowing what anything is in regards to these three things, because all they do is hurt us. Every one of these things has destroyed a family, has destroyed an individual or plural, and yet all three of them seem to be socially acceptable. As a Christian, the golden rule tells me to do what? To do unto others as I would have them do unto me. How then can I do any of these three and be acceptable in the eyes of the golden rule? You and I today are the temple of God. It's no longer a physical building. And back in Matthew 21, there was a biblical discussion that Jesus had with the people who were cheating people out of their money and they were not behaving properly. And Jesus says, don't make my Father's house a den of thieves. Don't make my Father's house something that it's not supposed to be. Brethren, can I submit to you today that we also should not make the temple of God, which we are, something that it ought not be. Unholy, unacceptable, so maddening to Jesus that he fashioned a whip and drove people out. I don't want on Judgment Day to be a part of these three things and have the Lord say to me, I don't know who you are. The well-being of others is so important. And as you and I think about this, look, it's not been a pleasure to preach this sermon. I can honestly tell you that. But I love preaching. And I want to give you good news. The part that I am excited about. This doesn't have to be how your life is known. And this doesn't have to be how life ends for you. The goodness of the gospel tells me that if I'm involved in any one of those things, I can get out of it. I can stop. I can stop being held over by an addiction, which, by the way, all three of those things are. I can stop being addicted to a sin, and I can start being focused on the Lord again. I can start putting my mind and putting my focus on things above, not on things below. And if I do that, I will not be brought under the power of any. Perhaps you're here this morning and you may be struggling with some of these very things. I don't know. But I do know this. The Lord doesn't want you to. The Lord doesn't want your life to be difficult because of these, but Satan does. And boy, the one telling you everything's okay is the one that's going to get us in the end if we believe him. Maybe you're here and you're not a child of God and you desire to become one. You can do that by hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized. Perhaps you've done that, but you've fallen away. You can do that. You can come back to the Lord. But you have to. You must. Before it's too late. Won't you please come right now as together we stand and sing.